I play viewers a lot on my stream, and a lot of the times what I see when I'm playing lower rated players is a lot of blunders. Piece blunders, going for a sacrifice when there's nothing there, or simply just not paying attention to what I'm doing on the board. So I'm going to give you guys some tips and situations where these tips might be applicable in order to help you hopefully reduce the amount of blunders that you make and capitalize on your opponent's blunders. The first question that you should always ask yourself before you make a move is, are you moving to a safe square? This one question can save you from a ton of blunders. For example, in this game, I was playing a viewer rated around 500, and they actually had a very solid opening setup that I didn't have too much to say about. It was a very solid London. They developed and they castled, and this was an amazing position. However, after I played the move knight to e4, and we traded off our bishop for the knight, and I attacked their knights, their first big blunder of the game was just dropping this knight for no compensation whatsoever. So had they asked that question, they might have realized that potentially moving back to e1 or forwards to e5 might have been a better move. Similarly to that game, asking yourself if you're moving to a safe square is one thing. Following up to that, if you see a lot of pieces looking at one square, counting attackers versus defenders is very important. For example, in this position here, I was playing a viewer around 1200, and they had an amazing setup here. However, they played the move knight to e4 in this position. And what did they miss? The fact that they only had one defender for their knight, and I had two attackers. Tunnel vision is so common in chess, so remember, while you're asking yourself these questions, scan the entire board. I guarantee you, you're bound to make less blunders. Another very important question to ask yourself is, whenever your opponent makes a move, what is their threat? For example, in this game, I was playing a viewer rated around 1100, and they had a very solid setup here. I played the move knight to d4, and within a span of 2 seconds, they played the move rook f to d8. And what did they not pay attention to? The fact that I was attacking this pawn on e6 here, and this is a very critical pawn in their setup that they just blundered away. So again, asking yourself the question of what is my opponent's threat might only take a couple seconds to spot. And that couple seconds that you spend asking yourself that question before you make a move is what's going to save you from making a blunder. Similarly to my last question to always ask yourself, are you moving to a safe square? Well, in the continuation of this game, you can see that my opponent didn't actually pay attention to my pieces. They were just kind of doing their own thing. After they decided to trade rooks, they played the move knight to c3. They were so focused on going for this fork that they didn't realize that I already had a bishop sniping on this diagonal ready to just capture them back. So always ask yourself, are you moving to a safe square? Reminder number 2. Here's another example of what happens when you're not paying attention to what your opponent's moves are and what their threats are with that move. For example, I was playing a 600 rated viewer in this position, and he had a fairly solid setup for the opening. I played the move knight to c3, adding an extra attacker on this pawn on d5. Now, all my tips connect, so ask yourself, how many attackers versus defenders are on this pawn on d5? Well, black has one defender, but as white, I have 2 attackers, which means I'm threatening to win this pawn. My opponent did not take much time, and they played the move bishop to d6. It's very common in the opening to ignore what your opponent's doing, and you're just trying to get your pieces out and castle. Which is great that you're trying to prioritize your king's safety, but you have to be paying attention to what your opponent's doing. Because here is another great example of they were so focused on what they were doing and not what I was doing that they just ended up dropping a very important pawn. This next tip is a little bit related to trying to avoid blunders, but also just simply trying to avoid wasting time. I was playing a 500 rated viewer in this position here, and we got to an endgame where I definitely have a lot more space and my pieces are further developed, but black is by no means losing. I have an advantage, but black can definitely still fight. Whenever you're playing, no matter how lost you might feel in a position, always try to have a plan in mind. Always try to ask yourself before you're about to make a move, what is the goal with my move? Am I actually trying to either improve my pieces, develop my pieces, form an attack, or am I just mindlessly playing moves, going for one move threats, and bouncing back and forth? If you lose too much time with your moves in chess, it can be the difference between an equal position or giving your opponent a small to large advantage. For example, in this position here, my opponent played the move bishop to e6, which I like that they were developing their bishop, but they're not really attacking anything by putting their bishop on that square, and they're welcoming me to further advance my pawns while also kicking their bishop back. So that was the first move with their bishop. Now they have to spend a second move moving their bishop back. After bishop d7, I played the move knight to d4, just trying to improve the position of my knight and sort of eye the e6 square if that bishop happens to move out. And to my luck, they played the move bishop to a4. Which again, their bishop was not in any danger, so this would have been an amazing time for them to potentially activate a rook or push one of their pawns. But by playing the move bishop to a4, they moved the bishop for a third time simply to attack my rook. And after I play rook to d2, I spent the past 3 moves improving 3 of my own pieces, and their bishop is now kind of just stuck in a corner, moving 3 times already, not really improving their position at all. So it can be hard to come up with a plan sometimes, but I will always encourage you to try to do so, because you'd rather have a bad plan and learn from your mistakes than have no plan at all. Having a plan is only going to improve your calculation and understanding of the game as you get better at chess. The next important tip to ask yourself before you make a move is, how does my move affect the safety of my other pieces? Now, what does this mean? For example, in this position, I played the move bishop to d6 against my opponent that was rated about 1,000. Now, bishops on these open diagonals staring at the opponent's king can be a little bit intimidating if you're not sure how to deal with it. So my opponent played the move g3, which is a big blunder because originally this pawn was defending the pawn on h3. Now, when they play the move g3 in hopes that they can block out my bishop on this diagonal, in exchange for that, they're giving up a very critical pawn on their king side. So they should have asked themselves, not just if they were moving to a safe square when they played g3, but when my pawn moves to g3, what was it defending before, and is that piece that it was defending before still defended or not? Another example of how that can play out is in a position like this. I was playing an opponent whose rating was about 600, and we had just traded off rooks here, and I took the pawn on c5, and then made the tragic mistake of playing the move rook to b3, simply allowing a back rank checkmate. Now, their rook was on the 8th row for so long, and they knew in the back of their minds that their king was safe because of it. However, before they played this move, they didn't ask themselves how them moving their rook affects the safety of their king that was now once defended, and in return, they blundered checkmates. So those are a couple of examples of why that question is also really important. And of course, with all these tips that I'm giving out to you guys, ask the same question for when your opponent makes a move as well. When your opponent makes a move, did they move to a safe square? How did their move affect the safety of their pieces? Did they move a piece that was defending another piece that's now hanging? Now, the last topic that I want to touch on for this checklist video is the topic of sacrificing. Sacrificing pieces in chess happens all the time. Some of the best games in chess have had brilliant sacrifices. However, there's also those that can go horribly wrong. Now, I'm not saying never to sacrifice, but here are some tips to hopefully help you make a better decision before you decide, should I sacrifice that piece or not? If you're planning on sacking a knight, for example, you have to make sure that you have calculated all the possible lines that your opponent could do to respond to that sacrifice before you commit to it. You want to make sure that you see through to a checkmate or the fact that you're winning more material than you sacrificed by force if you play that move. A lot of the times, lower-rated players that I play or students will say that they decided to sack a piece because it looked scary or because they saw one line that was winning and they hoped their opponent would play that. Firstly, something that looks intimidating versus its actual threat is vastly different. You want to make sure that's a real threat and it doesn't just look pretty at first, but then becomes nothing. You also don't want to play hope chess. If there's 3 or 4 lines that are possible after you sacrifice that knight, and only one of those leads to checkmate or winning more material, you shouldn't really play that move hoping that your opponent plays into the one line that's losing for them. Forcing yourself to calculate before you commit, especially to a sacrifice, is only going to help with your calculation and making better decisions. Now, obviously, if you're playing for fun, you just want to experiment, by all means go for it and have fun. But if you're actually trying to improve your chess and you have the time on the clock to think about that move, make sure you consider it, because I've seen so many sacrifices go wrong just because the player didn't want to take that extra few minutes to make sure that it was a worthwhile sacrifice that they were committing to. So those are a bunch of tips that I have for you guys that can hopefully help you guys make less blunders and also capitalize on your opponent's blunders. If this video helped, make sure to give it a like, comment down below what are the types of videos you guys want to see next, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.